The world tilted sideways, and then it went out entirely. One moment I was standing between the lavender honey stand and a row of fresh-cut dahlias at the Saturday market on the waterfront, and the next moment my knees were on the pavement and I couldn't tell which direction was up. I remember the smell of coffee from a nearby cart. I remember thinking I should sit down, and then I remember nothing at all. When I opened my eyes, there was a woman crouched over me, her hands on my left wrist, not holding it to check my pulse. She was working at the band around it, trying to pull it free. "Hey," my voice came out wrong, too thin, too far away. "What are you?" "Don't move yet." Her voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that's earned rather than assumed. "You fainted. I'm going to need you to lie still for another minute." "That's my bracelet." I reached for her hand and she paused, looking at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were gray and very focused. "My daughter gave it to me." She didn't let go. She just held my gaze for a long moment and said, "I know, and that's exactly why we need to talk. My name is Miles Drayton. I'm 62 years old, and for most of those years I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I worked hard. I raised a family. I paid off the mortgage on our house in the Eastmoreland neighborhood of Portland, the one with the big Douglas fir in the backyard that my wife Carolyn always said she'd miss if we ever left. We never left. Carolyn left instead 2 years ago this past April. A stroke, one morning to the next, the way some things happen, without warning or permission. I retired from my civil engineering firm the following spring. 33 years designing bridges, managing infrastructure projects, watching Portland grow from one set of drawings at a time. I'd planned to retire with Carolyn. We had it mapped out, the Oregon coast, the garden she'd been redesigning in her head for 2 decades, some travel, some slowness. Instead, I retired into a house that was too quiet and a life that needed rearranging from scratch. I wasn't falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I was managing. I walked every morning along the Springwater Trail. I had my woodworking class at the community center, my neighbor's Tuesday poker game, my old friend Stuart, who had dragged me to bad movies every 3rd Friday since before either of us went gray. I wasn't drowning. But the loneliness had a particular weight to it some evenings that I hadn't found the right way to carry. That's the only thing you really need to know about where I was when everything changed. Not that I was weak, not that I was old, just that I was alone in a house full of someone else's absence. And when my daughter called in early February and said she wanted to come home for a while, something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. She arrived the following Saturday with 2 suitcases and a tote from Whole Foods on Burnside. She looked like her mother around the eyes, which still caught me by surprise sometimes. Her husband Brandon came with her, working remotely, the kind of quiet presence that asks little and takes up little space. We ordered Thai food and stayed up until midnight, talking about nothing in particular. And for the first time in months, the house felt like something other than a museum. The second evening she was there, she put a box on the kitchen table after dinner. "I got you something," she said. Matte black packaging, silver lettering, CardioSync Elite. Inside the foam cutout sat a wristband, dark gray, thin, with a flexible display panel along the face, medical-looking, expensive-looking. "It's a cardiac health monitor," she said, already explaining before I could ask. She'd always done that, my daughter, led with the research. "It tracks heart rate variability, arrhythmia markers, blood oxygen. If it picks up anything abnormal, it alerts me directly through an app." She paused. "Dad, Dr. Whitmore flagged that irregular rhythm at your physical 2 years ago. You said it was nothing." I never stopped thinking about it. There had been something noted at a routine checkup, a minor irregularity, nothing requiring treatment, something to monitor. I'd monitored it. Nothing had changed. "The device also uses bioelectrical feedback," she continued, "to help regulate rhythm. It's used in clinical settings. I had a cardiologist contact of mine review the specs." I looked at the price on the inside of the lid, $1,095, 3 weeks of my monthly retirement draw. But she was here. She'd come back from San Francisco to be closer to me. She'd spent her own money on something to monitor my heart. She looked like Carolyn around the eyes. I fastened the band around my left wrist. It fit like it had been fitted for me. "You have to wear it all the time," she said. "Even when you sleep. The sensors need constant contact to build an accurate baseline. If you take it off, the data resets. That night I fell asleep with the display glowing faintly against my wrist, showing my heart rate at 68 beats per minute. Calm, normal, fine. 3 days later, the palpitations started. A flutter behind the sternum, brief, then gone. I'd had something like it before, too much coffee, a stressful phone call. But by the end of the week, it was happening 4 and 5 times a day. Not painful exactly, but wrong. The kind of sensation that makes you suddenly conscious of your own chest in a way you usually aren't. I mentioned it to her. She leaned forward immediately. That's the device detecting the underlying irregularity. It's actually good. The sensors are picking up what we need to see. Give it another week. The bioelectrical calibration takes time. The shortness of breath came next. I could walk, climb stairs, function. But there was a tightness that hadn't been there before, a sense each breath was slightly smaller than it should be. I stopped my morning walks along the trail. I started sitting down more than I used to. Stuart called about a movie. My daughter was in the kitchen when his name appeared on my screen, and I watched her glance at the phone and then at me, and something in her expression went careful. Later she said, "I think you should take it easy for a while. Stuart's a lot, and your stress markers have been elevated. The app is showing patterns I don't love." She held up her phone. Graphs. Numbers I didn't know how to read. I didn't call Stuart back. That was the moment I should have understood what was happening. I see that clearly now. But in real time I was being told by my own daughter, who had come home, who had spent money on a device to protect me, who checked on me every morning, that I needed rest. She had data. She had a cardiologist contact. She had graphs. And I was tired, and my chest hurt, and she looked like her mother around the eyes. So I rested. Over the next 2 weeks, my world contracted in increments small enough that I almost didn't notice each one. My woodworking class, too much exertion. The neighborhood association meeting, too stressful. The quarterly lunch with Vera, my former colleague from the firm. She always got me worked up about old projects. Each cut was dressed in the language of concern. Each reduction framed as temporary, just until your markers stabilize, just until we get a good baseline. My days reorganized themselves around my daughter's app. Then she sat across from me at the kitchen table and put a document between us. A financial power of attorney form. She explained it carefully. I was managing real estate and a retirement portfolio alone. If something happened medically, bills needed to be paid, accounts needed to be accessible. It was just a precaution. It was just love. "I'm not incapacitated," I said. "No," she agreed. "But what if you were?" I didn't sign it. But I kept the form on the table, and I found myself looking at it, and I noticed that I'd started thinking about my own accounts differently than I had 6 weeks ago, as something I might need help managing, which was new, which hadn't been true before she arrived. That night I called Stuart from the back bedroom with the door shut. "She's got you wrapped up," he said when I'd explained the last month. "You know that, right?" "She's worried about me." "Maybe. Or maybe she's worried about something else." He was quiet for a moment. "Miles, you built bridges for 33 years. You don't take risks you haven't calculated first. Don't stop being that person now." After I hung up, I stood at the window looking at the fir tree Carolyn had loved, and I made a decision. I was going to take the bracelet off, not permanently, just for a few hours, just to know. The band slid free slowly, and when it cleared my wrist, something happened that I wasn't ready for. The tightness in my chest, the constant low-level pressure I'd been carrying for 6 weeks loosened, quietly, not dramatically, just a fist unclenching. I sat still and breathed and counted my breaths, deep, even, unobstructed. 3 hours, no palpitations, no shortness of breath, nothing at all. I put the bracelet back on before my daughter came home, and I told myself I was being irrational. The symptoms were real. The device was helping. I was imagining things. But I had been an engineer for 33 years. I understood feedback loops, and something in me had cataloged that 3-hour window with the precision of someone who couldn't entirely let it go. The following Saturday I went to the farmer's market. I'd been going every week for 9 years, and I needed it the way you need things that remind you of who you are. I told my daughter I was going for a short walk and left before she could reframe it as a health risk. I was standing near the flower stands when the world tilted sideways. The flutter first, then a wave of dizziness so complete and sudden, I had no time to reach for anything. My knees hit the pavement, everything went dark. Her name was Elaine Cassidy. She told me that once I could sit up on my own, which took a few minutes, someone brought water. She kept one hand on my arm and her eyes on my face the whole time. "I'm a retired pharmacologist," she said. "FDA, 22 years. I was at the flower stand when you went down." She nodded at the bracelet, which she'd worked partially free before I woke. "I noticed it when I checked your pulse. The electrical output on this device, I could feel it against my fingers. That's not normal for a passive monitoring band." "It's a cardiac monitor," I said. "CardioSync Elite." She was quiet. "I've never heard of that device. I spent 2 decades reviewing medical device approvals." She turned my wrist and looked at the underside of the band where it met my skin. A faint redness I hadn't noticed. "How long have you been wearing it?" 6 weeks. "And the symptoms?" 3 days after I put it on. She looked at me then. "Not the bracelet, me. Will you let me examine this properly? I live 3 blocks away. It won't take long." I thought about calling my daughter. I thought about the form on the kitchen table. I thought about 3 hours with my own chest back. "Yes," I said, "let's go." We sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by houseplants and stacked books, and the comfortable disorder of someone who lives alone without apology. She had a multimeter, a magnifying lamp, and a patience she clearly didn't have to manufacture. She worked for 20 minutes without saying much. Then she showed me. The CardioSync Elite appeared nowhere in any FDA device registry she could locate on her laptop. The bioelectrical feedback it claimed to deliver was real, but calibrated wrong. The electrical pulses it was emitting against my skin were irregular in a way that, in someone with a pre-existing cardiac irregularity, would reliably induce palpitations over time. The effect built gradually, which explained the first 3 quiet days. It also explained the 3-hour window. My heart, freed from the interference, had simply returned to its own rhythm. There was more. Embedded in the band, visible once she peeled back a thin inner layer, was a GPS transmitter. Alongside it, a component she identified with the assurance of someone who had spent decades reviewing component specs, a miniaturized audio pickup. I sat with that for a while. "Someone has been listening," I said. "Someone has been listening," she confirmed, "and tracking where you are, continuously." My phone rang, my daughter's name on the screen. I answered it. "Dad, where are you?" Controlled voice. Something underneath it that I recognized now. "I'm visiting someone," I said. "The bracelet isn't transmitting. Is it still on your wrist?" I took it off for a bit. Silence. "Then, why would you do that? You know you're not supposed to." "I collapsed at the market," I said. "Someone helped me. She's a pharmacologist." She looked at the bracelet. Another silence, longer. "Whatever she told you," my daughter said carefully, "she's not qualified to assess this technology. She's drawing the wrong conclusions." "She found the microphone," I said, "and the GPS." Silence. "Those are standard in medical monitoring devices. Emergency response features, so paramedics can locate." 3 weeks ago, I called Stuart from the back bedroom with the door closed, I said. "The next morning you knew what we talked about. I didn't tell you. He didn't tell you. How did you know?" The silence that followed was the longest yet. "Come home," she said, and the warmth was gone entirely now. "We'll talk in person." "Not yet. Dad, if you refuse to come home, I'm going to have to be very concerned about your state of mind. You've been under enormous stress. You lost Mom. You're not well. I'm going to have to." "To what?" I kept my voice level. "Tell someone I'm having a breakdown?" "I'm your daughter," she said. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" She didn't answer. She hung up. Elaine was watching me with the quiet attention of someone who'd seen difficult things before and knew when not to speak. "I need to do this correctly," I said. "I need to document everything before I go home." "Yes," she said, "you do." I called Stuart. He arrived in 20 minutes. I called the non-emergency police line on Elaine's recommendation. The responding officer was in her 30s and took one look at the device and called her supervisor. By early evening, There were 4 people in that kitchen, and a detective asking me to start from the beginning. I told them everything. I left nothing out. My daughter was at the house when officers arrived that evening. Brandon was there too, and the shock on his face looked genuine in a way that mattered to the investigators later. My daughter didn't look shocked. She looked like someone who had prepared for this and was moving to the next contingency. She spoke about my health, my grief, my inability to manage my own affairs. She was composed and articulate and very good at it. But the device was evidence. The audio recordings transmitted to her phone, files she hadn't thought to delete, were evidence. The GPS logs were evidence, and the unsigned financial power of attorney form on my kitchen table was a document that several people were suddenly examining very carefully. What came out over the following weeks was larger than I'd known to expect. My daughter had been approached 14 months earlier by a network operating across at least 7 states, recruiting individuals with financial backgrounds and access to aging parents with significant assets. The target profile was specific: retirement holdings above $500,000, real property, no surviving spouse, documented health history. I met every criterion. The bracelet had been supplied to her by the organization. The electrical components, the symptom-inducing pulses, the GPS, the audio, had been engineered deliberately. The goal was straightforward: increase dependency, justify financial takeover, remove outside relationships that might interfere. 17 confirmed cases. 12 involved adult children of the targets. In 3 cases, targets had already signed over financial control before the scheme was disrupted. 1 man in his 70s had died of cardiac complications, and prosecutors were still determining the device's role. 17 cases. I was the one who'd noticed 3 hours of quiet breathing. My daughter cooperated with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. I don't know the precise terms. Some parts of this I've chosen not to follow closely. There are things I'm still working out with a therapist, which is its own kind of ongoing work. The house felt different when I came back to it. Not bad different. Returned to itself. The fir tree in the back was the same fir tree. I called Stuart that night and we talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular, which was exactly what I needed. I went back to my morning walks on the Springwater Trail within the week. Back to woodworking, back to Vera's lunches, back to Stuart's terrible taste in movies. My chest keeps its own rhythm now, without anyone's assistance, which is all it was ever doing until someone decided to interfere with it. I've spoken twice now at events organized by a patient advocacy group working on technology-enabled elder financial abuse. That term, elder financial abuse, used to conjure phone scammers and strangers. Now I understand it can wear a face you've known since it was a child's face. That's the part that doesn't resolve cleanly. The therapist says it doesn't have to. What I know, in a way I didn't before, is that love moves in a specific direction. It opens rather than closes. It gives you back your morning walk and your old friends and your right to make your own decisions, including the wrong ones. The moment someone names their control over you as love, the moment concern becomes surveillance, care becomes a lock on the door, something has shifted, and the shift is not small, and you are allowed to name what it is. I wear a Seiko watch now. Analog, 12 years old, no apps, no sensors, no data going anywhere. It tells me the time and nothing else. Some mornings I stand at the kitchen window with my coffee and look at the fir tree, and I think about Carolyn, and I think about what she would have made of all this, and I think she would have had something very precise to say about it. She always did know a thing or two about what love was actually supposed to look like.